In Genesis chapter 1, there's a powerful lesson that God gives us about sin. I'm kind of surprised because it's all the way back in the very first book of the Bible, well, I said Genesis 1, I mean Genesis 4, but in this very first book of the Bible is this powerful lesson about sin. And I'd like to read Genesis chapter 4, verse 7. It says, God speaking to Cain, because Cain and Abel had brought sacrifices, but God didn't accept Cain's sacrifice. And he says in Genesis 4:7, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. The figure of speech that God uses here is what we call personification. What that means is God takes something that is inanimate, something that is not alive, and then gives it characteristics as if it is alive. And he's speaking of sin. And the use of the language is, it's crouching at the door. Now that's pretty interesting because there's not a lot of animals that crouch, but one that does is a predator called, big tigers, cats, lions, leopards. They crouch, and when they crouch right before they leap, right before they're ready to pounce on you. And what God says to Cain is like, Cain, you've got to learn to do what's right. And if you don't do what's right, you've got to be careful because sin is crouching right at your door. It's right on the threshold. You're that far away from it. And when you yield to it, it is going to pounce on you. But you must master it. In other words, we have the ability to be able to do things so that sin is powerless when it comes to us. Now, I'm not trying to make any pretense that sin is something that we don't have to struggle with. This is definitely something that we have to strengthen ourselves. But I think that there are things that God has shown us that we can learn from on how we can become stronger so that we can master ourselves and discipline ourselves against that sin that's always ever present. The minute I do wrong, it's right there. It's ready to grab me, to pounce me. And one of the things that we can learn from this section in Genesis is, first of all, when we do right, we're accepted. But when we do wrong, like I said, it's ready to pounce. And I'd like to read Luke, because there's also a similar example here where Jesus was talking to Peter. And in Luke 22, verse 28, Jesus said, you are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in the kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And right in that context, he says, Simon, Simon, Satan has desired or has asked to sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. One of the lessons we can learn is it's our faith, our confidence, our assurance in God that will help us to strengthen ourselves against that crouching lion, sin, that's always at our door. But when we fail, when we sin, when we mess up, there's things that we can do that will help us greatly. One, we confess our sin. Let's just get honest with God. And let's start calling sin for what it is. Too many times I hear people say, well, I messed up. Or, I wasn't on my game. Or, well, I kind of slipped up there. What do you mean you messed up? Call it out for what it was. You mean when you deceived me? Or, well, I wasn't on my game. Oh, you mean when you lied to me? When I lie, just say, you know what? I spoke falsely. I lied. Or if you're struggling with jealousy or a bad attitude, call it out for what it is. I work with people, and I'm not always, perfect. Certainly anybody around me knows that's true. And so, sometimes I come in and I'm upset. I've got things that are going on, just like everyone else in life. The other day, my friend John said something to me, and I kind of barked at him. That was sinful. I came back in my office, sat down, and thought, dang it, why did I do that? I'm really sorry about that. Got up, walked in his office, said, John, that was really wrong of me to say that. I barked at you. that was bad. I'm sorry. Will you please forgive me? He's like, oh, of course, forget it. I'm not even. But, you know, I confess the sin. Because let's just be honest about it. Once I confess it, and then I can repent of it, meaning I can recommit myself to change, not to do that, not to be as sensitive in the future or something. And then I can release it. I can move on because I've confessed it. I've been open. You know, certainly secret sin is not a secret to God. And all it does is it hurts ourselves. So what we need to do when we have that sin, we've got to bring the darkness to the light. Just confess it. Just bring it out. And release it. And then let it go. Another thing we can do to master sin is don't isolate ourselves. When there's a predator, like a tribe of lions, and it wants to eat the gazelles, what does it do? It gets them running so that it can isolate the young, the old, the weak, the infirm, and get it removed from the rest of the herd. Another thing we can do to master sin is to not isolate ourselves. So many times when we're hurting, we withdraw. We try to pull into ourselves. And there could be a time where that's necessary. But yet what we need to do is invite people into our lives, people that we know that are safe, that we can have as a confidant, that you can talk to openly and honestly. In fact, in James chapter 5, verse 16, it says, confess your sin one to another. And it says, and pray for each other so that you may be healed. Well, certainly sin is something we need to be healed about. And confessing our sin brings that darkness to the light so that we can be healed, so that we can be whole, so that we can move on. Another lesson that we can learn is to watch out with who we're connecting with. First of all, don't isolate yourself. And when you do connect to people, make sure you're connecting to the right kind of people. The more that I've pressed into the ways of God, there's been friendships and some associations that have just had to drop and fall to the wayside because they were not people that were feeding me towards more righteous or holy behavior, or people that actually I was tempted to fall into the bad company with them. You know, when I've got a bad attitude or when something hurtful's been done to me, someone sinned against me, the first thing I want to do is usually want to talk to other people. Well, be careful the associations you have, the kind of people that you're talking to. Because we all want to, if I've sinned, I want to reinforce within my own heart that I'm not wrong. And certainly there's people whose motives are not best who will feed that. That's not the kind of friends I want. I'm a truth seeker, which means when I'm off, when I've sinned, I want people to say, hey, that was wrong, Dan. I need to talk to you about that. That hurts. I don't want to hear it necessarily, but I do ultimately want to hear it because I want to be a better person. So if we're to master sin that's crouching at the door, we need not to isolate ourselves. We need to connect with people that are godly, inspiring, that build us up, that help us, that will inspire us towards righteous behavior. And we need to be honest. First of all, honest with God, just honest with what's going on in your heart, and honest with others around you that you can trust. And if we do that, then that sin that's crouching at our door, we're going to learn to master it.